Okay, thank you, Tapio. I will be your chairperson for the rest of the conference, and we will have two presentations for today. And the first one comes from British Geological Survey, Stefan Horn, and Stefan is going to talk about assessing ESG challenges for cobalt supply for new mining projects in Europe. Stefan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Yes, so I come from the British Geological Survey, and I'd like to talk about cobalt in Europe. This was part of my PhD project, which I finished a year ago. So let's go straight into it. So you might know cobalt is a critical metal, or many countries say identified as a critical metal. Here's why. So, like, looking at the demand side of things, it used to be used mainly in, as a color in blue pigments, but in the 20th century, it became more and more used in new technologies, and starting with superalloys in aircraft turbines, and then later on we see it used in lithium-ion batteries, and with the clean energy transition to clean transport, we see more and more electric vehicles on our streets, and therefore there's quite a high demand for cobalt in batteries. Now, looking on the supply side of things, you can see on this pie chart that we have certain big producers that produce most of the world's production. So more than, I think now it's actually more like 69% of world production is from the DRC, from Congo, where it comes from stratiform sediment-hosted copper-cobalt deposits. So it's a byproduct of copper here in this case. And then we have two other deposit types where it is mainly mined, which is nickel-cobalt laterites, where again is a byproduct of nickel, and magmatic nickel-copper deposits above, which is a big producer is Canada, and laterites is Indonesia at the moment. So what does that mean for Europe? Europe is trying to bring the whole cobalt supply chain into the continent. And looking at the supply chain here, when we start from the use phase, we can see that 27% of EVs in the world are produced in Europe. So that's not actually not so bad. Looking on the battery manufacturing side, we can see that's only 3%. Most of the batteries are still produced in China, as some of you may know. On the refining side, it's not too bad. Again, we have 19% of production in Europe from Finland and Belgium. But the worst pie chart here is the production of mining. And so it's only 1% that of the world production of cobalt is in Europe, mainly from Finland. So this is, although there's actually quite a lot of deposits in Europe. So I made this, it was another part of my research where I looked at all the deposits that are available in Europe, and you can see that there's basically dots everywhere. You can see some of those are deposits with resource estimates, which we mainly find in Fennoscandia, which we have pointed out before, where we have lots of magmatic nickel-copper deposits and other things where cobalt exists. And then another little cluster you can see in the Balkan area, so we see in the laterites in Turkey and Greece, Albania, and so forth as well. But you can see also many other deposits over Central Europe. So now the thing I want to talk today is about what is the challenges of bringing these in production and bringing new exploration projects online. So I focused on 7 exploration projects, mainly in the Nordic countries, and there's a few in Finland, which we have mentioned, we have heard before from Tony. We have one in Sweden, in Norway, and then one in Turkey. And we have 2 mines that currently produce cobalt, which is Kevitsa and the Gerdes mine in Turkey. So I developed this multi-criteria analysis. There's a lot of indicators, and I'm not going to talk about everything of those, but just to give you an idea of what we've done. So some of these are country-specific, just looking at the country side of things, what affects governance, environment, social aspects, and also looking at the economics of the mines. And we looked at relevant literatures and also interviewed relevant stakeholders. So I'm just going to dive in. So these are the overall results presented at a heat map. You can see on the right and the left side the different deposit types, the projects, and then on the bottom you have all the different indicators. And you can see there's quite a colorful picture. 1 is a good ranking, 6 is a bad ranking in pink, and yeah, so all these deposits have different problems, and I'm just going to dive into a few of those to give you an example of how I've done this. So the first one is the political and legal aspects, and this is based on the World Governance Indicator, which some of you may have heard of. So it's looking at factors like political stability, government effectiveness, rule of law, control of corruption, things like that. And when we see the results here, Finland, Norway, and Sweden are quite high in this. They overall rank very high and above OECD average in these governance indicators, whereas when we look at Turkey, there's still lots to do potentially, especially in political stability. We had an attempted coup in 2016 and some constitutional changes, which leads to a lower governance, a weaker governance. Now, looking at the land use, we actually looked on a project scale, and you can see the land use maps on the right side, where I plotted the exploration permit area with a buffer around it and looked at the different ecoregions. So one part of this is looking at the ecosystem service values. So you can see that, for example, wetlands. We have heard about Sakati, and there's a very important protected area, which is the Viankapa Maya, which is mainly a wetland. And wetlands are quite important because they protect us from flooding and things like that. Other things like cropland is very important for food production. So people have tried to put a monetary value onto these. So, and I use this to come up with a kind of value of how important is this land area in terms of land use and environmental land use. And Sakati is unfortunately quite bad in this because there's quite a lot of wetland in this area. Kivitsa as well, where the other two are a bit better. Then also looking at the proximity to protected areas. So you can see on these maps as well, these green shades, which are protected areas like Natura, habitat sites, and nature national parks. And you can see that Rajapalot has quite a large area which is covered with protected areas, and Sakati is the same problem which we heard before. Whereas on the other two, there's not as much. Kusamo has a lower area, for example. But then looking at reindeer herding, this is something I included as well. It's very specific to the Fennoscandian areas, of course, but I thought it was quite important to include because it's a very important land use for Sami indigenous people. And so you can see that there's some areas in Fennoscandia which there's quite a high use of reindeer herding, or quite a lot of reindeer herding, where there's a bit in Finland which is a bit lower use, just to keep it very simple. And you can see that Kusamo and Rajapalo are in the yellow area, whereas Sakati and Kivitsa are just about in an area where there is quite a high reindeer herding area. So this is quite important. So overall, these rank in this case, Sakati and Kivitsa have quite a low rank in this case, whereas Kusamo comes out as a quite a good rank, where we'll see later that in other places it's not as good. Looking at this very, very briefly, also looked at the environmental stress, looking at the energy consumption of the different deposit types. So now we're looking at what are the different, so laterites, for example, the girders and the Chaldag mine on the right side have a very high energy consumption. They're using, one is high pressure acid leaching, which uses quite a lot of energy. Also acid consumption is quite high, which I haven't looked at. And compared to that, the cobalt gold projects, Rajapalo and Kusamo, have, if they're using this kind of process, it will be quite a low energy consumption. So in comparing that with the renewable energy share that these countries have, we can see that Turkey will have, with a higher energy consumption and quite a high fossil fuel energy use and less renewable energies, it will have a high effect on the climate. So therefore, the Turkish deposits, in this case, plot relatively low, where we have the Finnish deposits plot better. So now talking a bit about social aspects. Some of these things you have heard from Tony already, but these are 3 indicators and just 3 of the projects that I want to point out here. So one of the things was business development and opportunities. I tried to kind of compare of if there's a new mine in this area, what would it mean to the business, the local business in the area, and what would it mean for workers and so forth. And you can see Kusamo, we had talked about, there's lots of tourism industry. There's a ski resort in the area, the Ruka ski resort. So there's quite a lot of opposition and another industry which is concerned that if a mining comes into place, that this would affect this existing industry. We're looking at Kiskamavara in Sweden. This is very close to the Kiruna mine in Sweden, which is a large mining area. So there's already mining in place. The right skills are in place from the workers in the area. So I would assume that this ranks better in this case. Then looking at, so these are the ranks for this. Then looking at public perception, we have heard that Kusamo has several disputes around in the past, so therefore it ranks quite low. We had lots of opposition. We're looking at Kiskamavara, for example. There were no local disputes, but I also would try to include public perception of the country. And there is definitely also opposition from Swedish people against, especially mining in Sami homeland, and Kiskamavara is quite high up in the north and is affected by this. So I tried to include this as well. It still ranks relatively good, but yeah. And Rajapalo is fairly good as well, but there is some opposition again from the NGOs because of that protected area. And very shortly, the corporate social responsibility. I looked at mainly the websites of these companies and see what are they doing to actively engage with the communities. Are they using the local language like Finnish, for example, to kind of make it understandable what they want to do? Or are they just focusing on new investors to get money in? And in many cases, the early exploration projects are not focusing so much on the community and trying to bring more investment in, which is often from outside of the country. And so I think, although it's very important to engage with communities very early on in the exploration, so that's a big problem I found, I think. So very quickly on looking on the economic aspects. So here you can see why Sakati is such a big project, or why it's so important. Although there's so many environmental impacts, you can see that the gross metal value, so looking at the current resource estimates, it's much higher than any of these other projects of their current resource estimates. It is a bit more advanced than some of the others here, but still you can see that there's quite a high value and there's quite a lot of, people want to make this work, basically. And comparing it to other mines like the Kiskamavara, unfortunately the resource estimates are currently not very high, therefore it plots quite low. And I tried to look at net smelter return, so including recovery rates and so forth, to see also bringing in the processing technologies as well. And then looking at cobalt. So most of these things were not really cobalt related and relative, but because cobalt is a byproduct, you can see that in some cases, cobalt might not be actually mined, or the recovery rates of cobalt might not be as high as the main products for nickel or copper, for example. So in the case of Sakati, you can see that the cobalt gross metal value share is just 5%, where most of the value of that deposit will come from nickel and copper. Comparing that to Rajapalo, which has about 10% of cobalt share. So it doesn't sound very much as well, but it's actually quite a high share for cobalt. There's not many projects which have a lot of cobalt share. However, you can also see that the gold share of this project is much higher, and the gold will basically run this project. And these companies make their decisions on processing technologies, trying to maximize recovery from the metals they are trying to get most profit out of it. And that's why you have different cobalt recovery rates for different processing technologies. In this case, you can see that the Turkish mines with the high pressure acid leaching have actually quite a high recovery rate compared to other things like the LK project. It's a palladium focused project. We only see 19% of recovery there. So a lot of cobalt would be lost to the tailing if they would use this processing technology. So these are the ranks here. So to discuss the things that I've kind of found through this development, it was a very difficult task in some cases, especially on the social aspects. It's very qualitative data. So there's lots of issues with the data, of course, but I think main things that I kind of found out was that we have some regional factors that affect ESGs, like we have different governance in different countries which affect it. In Finland, Norway, and Sweden, we have a good and strong national mineral governance, whereas in Turkey, we have some issues around that. There's been opposition against new investment from foreign companies, so we had resource nationalism coming up there, for example, which has made some mines being opposed and not having to be, were not worked in the end. But we also have problems in the Nordic countries with indigenous people And some people might say that the Arctic is more vulnerable to climate change. And you can sometimes read in the papers that basically the Sami people have to pay for the green energy transition that Europe is trying to make. Yeah. So these are things that come up when you read the newspapers about these places. And then on the local side, I mentioned protected areas, reindeer pastures, and we also have resource and industry conflict with water use or forestry. And last but not least, geological factors like what kind of mining method is used and the deposit type affect byproduct cobalt production. So I wanted to mention Sakati here. We heard that it has gone underground because of these issues with the environmental protection area. So they decided to go underground. Although it's more costly, it makes sense for them to go underground. And we saw that it has quite a high value, so it's possible to do that. And they have also planned to put all their facilities outside of that protected area. Yeah, so to conclude, yeah, we have a lot of regional, local, and geological factors that influence the success of a new mine. This new multi-criteria analysis is something that I'm hoping will be helpful for new projects to kind of assess what might be the challenges in the future for them to be successful, to start a mine. And we can see some pros and cons for the countries. So Finland and Norway, we have a very well-established mineral governance. It's very rich in cobalt-bearing deposits. However, we have some issues with the Arctic being more vulnerable than other ecoregions to climate change. We have indigenous people in the area which are seeing their country and their land use being more restricted the more new projects are coming into place. And in Turkey, we could have some additional cobalt supply which could come in production in the future, not only from Turkey but also from the Balkans, if we would use more of these laterite deposits to produce cobalt. And the cobalt recoveries could be quite high. However, at the moment, in Turkey, the legislation are sometimes insufficient to protect the environment properly and also engage with the communities. Yeah, so that's it. Thank you for your attention. I'll leave you with the results again.
Thank you, Stefan. And actually, you have still, like, according to timetable, there is a small typo. You have still 20 minutes for your speech, but I think we go for the questions. And I have a first comment on this Moson, Finland, who is operating in the Rajapalot area, and also latitude 66 cobalt, which is in the Kuusamo area. Yeah. They are really good examples how they are engaging with the local communities, and they are really active in that sense.
I think I had it on the slide, but I haven't been able to mention it. That on the social aspect, Rajapalo is doing quite well in, Kuusamo, Lab 66 as well, yes. Actually, because of the incidents that happened before, they're trying to be really engaging. All the website is completely in Finnish, for example. I mean, this is a very simple example, but I think it gives you an indication of that these countries are trying to make an effort where others might, where it's an Australian company coming in, only having a little page on this project as a side project. Everything is in English, so it's definitely focused to investors rather than the community.
One question about this: have you shared your findings with Moson, and are you in touch with the mining companies and junior companies who are operating?
Sorry, again?
Are you in touch with? Have you been cooperating with them, or?
No, I haven't. No.
Yeah, because that would be a good idea to contact them. And,
I agree.
I know some. Latitude will be our partner in undercover deep exploration process. So that could be a good possibility.
Yeah, true. That would be a good addition, actually. I agree.
Are there any other questions? Tony, there.
Yeah, thanks for excellent presentation. I would like to ask about, you mentioned that Rajapalot is related, the dispute is related to tourism and reindeer herding. Where did you get this information?
No, I didn't mean to say that reindeer herding was the social opposition. I think so-called opposition was mainly from the NGO, which
FANC,
yeah,
yeah.
FANC, yes.
Yeah, but you gave
You
kind
mean-
of understanding that tourism was somehow related, but it's not touristic area at all.
Okay.
Yeah. But Kuusamo is definitely.
Yeah. Okay.
Any other questions? Now it's good opportunity because we have still a lot of time for questions. But if there are not any, I thank you, Stefan. Very good presentation. Thank you.